Every week I have a column in the News Corp Sunday papers that's published across the country, and I file my words the day before. Usually it's around lunchtime on a Saturday. Now this week, on Saturday, I confess as I sent the column off, I was a little bit despondent that despite Israel's incredible bombing raids earlier in the week, it had severely weakened Iran. I was concerned that Donald Trump was going to squib it. Remember, he gave Iran 14 days, we were told on Friday, to get to the negotiating table. Now, I wrote for years the world's debated how to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. It's tried to negotiate with them, I wrote, and stupidly paid them billions to stop, which didn't. And then it's threatened them, which for a country run by Islamic fundamentalists who cheer death, well, that hasn't worked either. So now we are at the point, I said, we're faced with a regime that literally wants to blow them off the face of the map. It is Israel who's taken them on and done more in 1 week than the United Nations and Western nations combined. And yet for Israel, there's been as much criticism as gratitude. Thank God for Israel, I wrote. But I said the big question now will be, what will Trump do? Will the US president be seduced by the prospect of an 11th hour deal that Iran will just ignore, as so many of his predecessors have done? Or will he finally finish off what Israel has bravely and with great precision started, that it is not just about protecting them, but the wider world? Well, by the time most of my readers were working through the papers over breakfast on Sunday, we found out the answer to that question as we watched the US president do what so many had merely threatened, namely to show strength against a tyrannical regime that is intent on not just blowing Israel off the map, but bringing death and destruction to all the Sunni Muslim neighbours and Christians the world over. This was not just a strike by the US against Iran. This was a strike by good against evil. It was a strike against an apocalyptic Islamist regime that simply can't be allowed to gain nuclear weapons. Weapons it would most certainly use, first to annihilate Israel, and then to achieve its aim of a global caliphate. Now, thank God for Israel. Thank God, too, for the United States that did what only the might of the United States could do when it launched Operation Midnight Hammer and all but wiped out Iran's nuclear capability. Now, whatever people might think of Donald Trump on this, he has acted while all of his predecessors have simply talked. It was Bill Clinton back in 1995 who first declared, and I quote, "We are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons." Then there was George W. Bush in 2006 who said, "Iran must not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, period." And here in 2015 was Barack Obama.
I have stated that Iran will never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon.
Sure, but on the path they went. And then in 2022, he was Joe Biden.
The United States is clear. We will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon.
Talk, just more talk. And here is Donald Trump from the weekend, having done, most likely, what others merely promised they would do.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
All right, let's be clear what has not happened and what almost certainly won't happen. There are no American troops on the ground. This is not a replay of the 2003 attack on Iraq in search of weapons of mass destruction. This is not a war against Iran, it's a war against Iranian nuclear weapons. If nuclear energy was all Iran wanted, why was it enriching uranium to weapons grade, to which international inspectors have attested? It's not a war for regime change either, although as long as the Ayatollahs are in charge, Iran will be a menace to its own people and its Sunni Muslim neighbours. But let's be clear what has been happening. The mullahs in Tehran have been in an informal alliance with the communists in Beijing and the militarists in Moscow, in a war against the West that includes Australia. It is no accident or coincidence that the Iranian Foreign Minister is reportedly going to Moscow to seek the Russian tyrant's advice and help. In striking hard against the Iranian nuclear program, America has undoubtedly strengthened global deterrence and reinforced President Trump's message of peace through strength. And it's precisely because this American action has been so right, so strong, so necessary, that the Albanese government's hesitations have been so telling. For 24 hours after the US action, all there was from the Australian government was a written statement from a spokesman demanding dialogue, diplomacy and de-escalation. Not that we even heard a word of any of this yesterday from the Prime Minister. I mean, just have a look at this. Now, he can post a photograph of his dog in the Prime Ministerial suite. That's the PM's private office there. This was on Friday to celebrate International Take Your Dog to Work Day. And yet he put nothing up on Iran until 3 hours ago, when it was just a clip of a press conference he gave earlier today. 24 hours of radio silence from a man who wants to call himself Australia's leader. What a joke. A surprise bombing raid from our closest ally against the world's most volatile, nearly nuclear-capable Islamists who hate us and our way of life. And Anthony Albanese couldn't get himself up and about on Sunday morning to explain to Australians what the heck was going on and what our own government knew of America's plan and if they were willing to back it in. I mean, this is extraordinary. I mean, yesterday, almost immediately after the US raid was known publicly, we got moral clarity, absolute moral clarity from former Special Forces captain, Liberal frontbencher Andrew Hastie.
We could never accept a nuclear Iran. Iran is a repressive, theocratic autocracy, and it's a sponsor of terrorism, as we've seen over the last few years. This is a regime committed to the destruction of Israel and our allies, like the United States. That is why we support the actions today.
He is in the opposition. And yet it wasn't until Monday morning that Foreign Minister Penny Wong finally emerged, briefly stepping into a corridor to say she supported, sort of, the American action.
Australia has been clear, along with the international community, that Iran cannot be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. We support action to prevent that from occurring, and this is what this is.
She said, quote, "We're not a central player." Well, we'll say that again. Even though Australia in the past has swiftly rallied to support our friends and allies in the cause of peace with freedom. A decade back, Australia's command and control aircraft and our aerial refuelling tankers were supporting US strikes on Islamic State as well as our own strikes. The Prime Minister, invisible since returning desperate and dateless from the G7, well, he told Sydney Radio this morning that he would have something to say after a national security briefing. As if he needed a briefing to know what he thought about stopping Iran going nuclear. Now, why wouldn't he have called an NSC meeting yesterday? John Howard and Tony Abbott, well, they made NSC sit on weekends and late into the night if there was a security issue where our national interest was at stake. But not so this bloke who could go to the footy on the weekend but can't go back into the office, it would seem. And when he finally emerged today around lunchtime, he said he backed the US strikes, but he's still equivocated.
We don't want escalation and a full-scale war. We continue to call for dialogue and for diplomacy.
And he was at pains too to stress that this had nothing to do with Australia.
Was a facility like Pine Gap used in this attack?
We don't talk about intelligence. We've made very clear this was unilateral action taken by the United States.
So was your government briefed prior to the attack?
This was unilateral action taken by the United States.
Prime Minister. PM, you weren't briefed. Is that the?
This was unilateral action taken by the United States.
And there was absolutely no Australian involvement whatsoever. Refuelling jets, nothing whatsoever.
Well, I can't be clearer than this was unilateral action taken by the United States.
An abbreviated press conference, a whole lot of rote lines, and then he shut it down quickly. Now, if we're serious about the US alliance, if we're serious about getting AUKUS submarines, we better get bloody serious about pulling our military weight. At a time like this, it really should be the Prime Minister, not his weak deputy, who's heading off to NATO this week in The Hague. Because the Prime Minister needs to hear directly that Australia is the only Western country not substantially increasing our military spending. Sit around the NATO table, Prime Minister, and that is what you will hear. You also need to have your first meeting with President Trump. Right now, our PM doesn't look like he's scared of meeting the leader of the free world. He just looks scared. And if our Prime Minister is scared, we are weak. And look around the world tonight, Australia. This is not a time to be weak or led by anyone who is scared, is it?